Elon Musk walked onto the talk show set, but by the end of the night, it was the host who found himself in the hot seat. The invitation had come through just like any other email, a simple subject line: Invitation to the Bryant Palmer Show. Musk barely gave it a second glance at first. He got these kinds of requests all the time: talk shows, news programs, tech panels. Most of them he declined.
But there was something about this one.
Bryant Palmer's show was massive. It was known for its mix of humor, controversy, and sharp interviews. Palmer had built a huge following, and people tuned in not just for the guests but for his knack for pushing boundaries, challenging ideas, and sometimes even humiliating his interviewees. Musk hesitated. His PR team had already vetted the request. "It's a good opportunity," his assistant had said. "Palmer reaches millions." Musk wasn't concerned about exposure, but he was curious. He'd heard all about Palmer's ability to turn an interview into a spectacle, how he thrived on making his guests uncomfortable. But Musk wasn't one to back down from a challenge. "Set it up," he finally said. The day arrived, and Musk found himself in a sleek, glass-walled studio in Los Angeles. The green room was quiet, filled with the distant hum of conversations. A production assistant handed him a bottle of water before disappearing. Musk glanced at his watch. The interview would start in 10 minutes. Across the room, a large screen played highlights from Palmer's past interviews. Clips flashed by of political leaders, Hollywood actors, and CEOs. Some laughed nervously, some argued, and others sat stone-faced as Palmer toyed with them like a cat with a mouse. Musk smirked slightly. He knew exactly what was coming. He had enough experience with interviews to recognize the pattern: bait, provoke, and wait for a reaction. The real question was, how far would Palmer push? A stagehand appeared at the door. "5 minutes, Mr. Musk," they said. Musk stood up, adjusting the sleeves of his black jacket. With the ease of a man who had faced rockets exploding mid-flight, factory failures, and financial meltdowns, he walked toward the stage. The studio was packed. Hundreds of people filled the seats, some die-hard fans, other skeptics, and a few who were probably just there for the drama. The set was modern, with a circular stage surrounded by bright LED panels. At the center was a large desk with 2 chairs, one for Palmer, one for Musk. Palmer was already there, flipping through a stack of cue cards. As Musk approached, Palmer looked up, flashing a practiced grin. "Elon," he said, standing to shake his hand. "Glad you could make it." "Likewise," Musk replied, shaking his hand firmly. They took their seats as the audience quieted. The show's theme music played, and cameras rolled. The stage lights dimmed, leaving only the 2 men in sharp focus. Palmer turned toward the camera, flashing his signature smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight," Palmer said. "The man behind Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and a dozen other companies. I probably can't pronounce half of them. Please welcome the one and only Elon Musk." The audience applauded, some cheering, others murmuring. Palmer leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "So, Elon," he began, his voice smooth, "let's get right into it. People call you a genius, a visionary. Some say you're changing the world. Others think you're a complete lunatic." He chuckled, waiting for a reaction. "Which one is it?" Musk smiled faintly. "I think history will decide." Palmer tilted his head. "Fair enough. But let's talk about something a little more interesting than just history, shall we?" There was something in his tone, playful but sharp, that made the audience sense this wouldn't be a friendly chat. Musk had expected as much. Palmer leaned back in his chair, twirling a pen between his fingers. "Elon, you've built rockets, electric cars, and even implanted chips in monkey brains," he said with a smirk. "Some would say you're playing God."
What do you say to that?
Musk chuckled. "I'd say if I were playing God, I'd at least make sure my rockets didn't explode." The audience laughed, but Palmer wasn't done.
He leaned in.
"Right, but let's be real," he pressed. "You've got more money than entire countries, and people worship you like some kind of prophet. Do you ever wake up and think, maybe I should slow down before I turn into the next Bond villain?" The crowd chuckled again, but there was something in Palmer's delivery, just a little too pointed. He wasn't joking, not really. Musk nodded slowly, considering his response. "I think if I were a Bond villain, I'd at least have a secret lair by now. But unfortunately, I still live in a $50,000 house in Texas. The audience laughed, but Palmer wasn't letting up. He flipped through his cue cards, pretending to search for something. Ah, yes, he said, tapping one card. Speaking of that house, didn't you just fire most of the janitorial staff at X? Musk's expression didn't change. We had to make some adjustments. Adjustments? Palmer repeated, his grin sharpening. That's an interesting way to say, left people jobless right before the holidays. The audience murmured, and the energy in the room shifted. Musk was used to tough questions, but this felt different. Palmer wasn't probing for answers. He was provoking a reaction. I assume you're talking about the San Francisco office? Musk asked, his tone even. That's the one, Palmer said, leaning forward. Reports say people were crying, Elon.
Crying.
You've got billions in the bank. Was that really necessary? Musk exhaled quietly. I think you know that running a company isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about keeping it alive. X was losing $4 million a day. Palmer shrugged. Must be tough. Being a billionaire and making all those sacrifices, the audience gave a nervous laugh. Some clapped, others stayed quiet. Musk didn't flinch. Asterisk, it's tough making a company work. There's a difference. Asterisk. Palmer tilted his head, sensing an opening. He gestured toward the crowd. You hear that, folks? Tough, being the guy who owns private jets and sends cars to space. A few more chuckles, a few murmurs. Musk let the moment sit, then leaned forward, just slightly. You want to have a real conversation, Bryant? Musk asked, his voice measured. Or are you just here to perform? The air in the room tightened. The audience fell into dead silence. Even Palmer blinked just for a second. But he recovered quickly, flashing his signature smirk. Oh, I love a good conversation, Elon, Palmer said smoothly. But I also love the truth. And the truth is, people say you're erratic. They say you make reckless decisions. Twitter, sorry, X, has become a chaotic mess under your leadership. Musk raised an eyebrow. That's funny. It was losing billions before I took over, and now it's making a profit.
Doesn't sound like chaos to me.
Palmer smirked. Right, but let's talk about something people really care about. He turned to the audience. Do we have any Tesla owners in the crowd? A few hands went up. Palmer grinned.
Nice.
You guys trust the self-driving feature. A few cheers, a few hesitations. Interesting, Palmer said, turning back to Musk. Because some people don't. There have been crashes, lawsuits, people losing their lives, and you keep pushing it like it's the future. Do you ever feel responsible when something goes wrong? Musk's fingers tapped lightly against the desk. You know, Bryant, we could talk about any car company and find accidents. But nobody asks Ford's CEO if he feels responsible when someone crashes a Mustang. Palmer chuckled. Fair, fair. But Ford's not promising full self-driving. You are. Musk smiled. Not yet. And neither are we. That's why we're still in beta. Palmer sighed theatrically. All right, let's move on. Neuralink brain chips. What happens when hackers get in? Or when the government decides to, I don't know, turn people into robots? A few audience members laughed nervously. Musk stayed quiet for a moment before responding. You watch too many movies, Bryant. The audience laughed again, but Palmer wasn't backing down. Come on, Elon. You can't tell me you don't see the risks. You want to put chips in people's brains, automate every car on the road, control internet satellites. At what point do we start calling it what it is? Power. Musk tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. You think I'm trying to control people? Palmer spread his hands. I think when one man has influence over social media, transportation, space travel, artificial intelligence, and now the human brain, yeah, it raises some questions. The audience murmured, some nodding, others not so sure. Musk let the moment hang for a second, then spoke. I think people should ask questions. I think skepticism is healthy. But the idea that I'm sitting in some lair, rubbing my hands together, that's a little ridiculous. Palmer chuckled. Well, you did name one of your AI projects Ex Machina. Sounds pretty ominous. Musk smiled faintly. It's actually XAI, but close. Palmer waved it off. Okay. But let's talk about something you can't dismiss so easily. He turned to the audience. Raise your hand if you've heard about the lawsuit against Tesla for racial discrimination. A few hands went up. Others stayed still. Musk's jaw didn't tighten, his expression didn't shift, but something changed in his eyes. Palmer pressed forward. There have been reports, Elon. Employees saying they were subjected to slurs, discrimination, unsafe work environments. That's happening inside your company. So I have to ask, how does the guy who wants to take humanity to Mars let this happen right here on Earth? A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Some people leaned forward, others sat back, watching closely. Musk's voice was steady when he responded. You're talking about an issue that affects every major company in America. And when we found problems, we've taken action. Palmer scoffed. Right, so you're saying it's just business as usual? Musk exhaled softly. I'm saying it's not unique to Tesla. And it's not something we ignore. But if you want to talk about lawsuits, let's talk about your network. Palmer blinked, taken aback for a moment. Excuse me? Musk leaned forward slightly. You work for a network that's been sued for pushing false information. You sit in that chair and call out corporate greed, but your show runs ads from pharmaceutical companies, billion-dollar banks, and defense contractors. The crowd stirred. This wasn't the usual back and forth anymore. Palmer chuckled, but it was thinner now. Nice deflection, but I'm not the one. Musk cut him off. You're not the one making billion-dollar deals behind closed doors. You're not the one taking orders from executives who decide what stories get airtime. You're not the one profiting off division. Silence. Palmer opened his mouth, but nothing came out right away. Musk continued, his voice calm. You want to talk about power? Let's talk about yours. You sit here pretending to be the voice of the people, but your paycheck comes from the same corporations you claim to call out. And the second you push too hard in the wrong direction, you're out of a job. The audience didn't know how to react. Some clapped. Others just stared. Palmer forced a chuckle. So, now you're flipping this on me? Musk shrugged. I thought you liked the truth. For the first time that night, Palmer didn't have a quick comeback. He shuffled his cue cards, trying to regain control, but something had shifted. Musk sat back, watching him. But the moment wasn't over yet. Palmer cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. He wasn't used to being on the defensive. The control he usually wielded so effortlessly was slipping, and the audience could feel it. But Palmer wasn't about to let Musk take over his show. All right, he said, forcing a grin. You got your shot in, but let's be real, Elon. You love playing the underdog. The misunderstood genius. The rogue billionaire fighting against the system. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. But isn't that just branding? A man worth nearly $200 billion isn't against the system. You are the system. Musk tilted his head slightly. Am I? Of course, Palmer said. You're the richest man in the world. You buy companies when they annoy you. You joke about free speech, but let's be honest, you run X like your personal playground. You decide who gets to speak, who gets to stay, who gets silenced. Musk's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room had. The energy had shifted, heavier now, charged with something unspoken. Palmer wasn't done. And let's not forget, he added, flipping to another cue card, you're friends with some interesting people, guys with a lot of influence. You and Peter Thiel, you and Saudi investors. Musk cut him off. Would you like to talk about your friends, Bryant? The words weren't loud, and they weren't sharp, but they landed like a punch. Palmer blinked. Excuse me? Musk's voice was steady. The people who fund your show, the executives who decide what you're allowed to say, the political donors who make sure you never push too hard in one direction. The audience stirred. Palmer forced a chuckle. Oh, so now you're turning this into some kind of conspiracy? Come on, Elon. No conspiracy, Musk said. Just reality. You think I have power? You're right. But at least when I make a decision, people know where it's coming from. Can you say the same? Palmer opened his mouth to respond, but closed it when Musk kept going. I build things. People see them. They work or they don't. If I fail, The whole world sees it. But you. He gestured around the set, his eyes cold. You sit here pretending to challenge the powerful while taking notes from them backstage. For a moment, Palmer's face twitched. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Some were nodding, a few clapping. Palmer could feel the control slipping through his fingers. He had to take it back. You're dodging the question, Palmer said quickly. This isn't about me. It's about you. People say you're erratic, that you push dangerous ideas, that your employees are terrified of you. Do you even care about the consequences of what you do? Musk leaned forward, his voice low and even. Do you silence? Palmer opened his mouth again, but Musk wasn't finished. You make your living stirring outrage, Musk continued calmly. You don't solve problems. You don't build anything. You just talk. And when the cameras stop rolling, when the controversy dies down, what have you actually done? Palmer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to regain control. Musk wasn't done. I get it, Musk said. Your job is to get people angry, to entertain, to keep the ad revenue flowing. But don't confuse that with actually making a difference. The room felt that one. A few people clapped. Others just watched in stunned silence. Palmer ran a hand through his hair, laughing tightly. Well, folks, he said, trying to keep the situation light, I think we just got a masterclass in deflection. Musk smiled. Or maybe in honesty. More claps. Palmer glanced off stage at the producers, who were watching him closely. He could feel the control he once held over the interview slipping away, and Musk knew it. But the real reaction was still coming. Palmer adjusted his tie, trying to hold onto his composure, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The confidence he walked in with was crumbling.
He wasn't used to this.
He wasn't used to losing. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Some leaned forward, intently watching. Others exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just another late-night interview. It was something else, something raw, something real. Palmer glanced at his cue cards, but the words barely registered. He needed to turn this around fast. So, Elon, he said, forcing his voice back into its usual rhythm. You came here to talk about innovation, about the future. Let's end on a positive note, shall we? He gestured broadly. What's next? What's the next big Musk project that's going to save humanity? It was a weak attempt to regain control. Musk saw it. The audience saw it. But Musk leaned back, considering the question for a moment. There are a lot of things in motion, he said finally. Advancing AI, space travel, sustainable energy, but I think the biggest challenge isn't technology. It's trust. Palmer raised an eyebrow. Trust. Musk nodded. People don't trust institutions anymore. They don't trust governments, the media, corporations. And most of the time, for good reason. A murmur ran through the crowd. Palmer gave a tight chuckle. And you think you're the solution? Musk shook his head. No, but I think honesty is. And I think people are tired of being manipulated. Palmer scoffed. So what? You're saying I'm the problem now. Musk tilted his head slightly. I think you're part of an industry that profits from keeping people divided, outraged, and distracted. Palmer blinked. For a split second, he had no answer. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then someone in the audience clapped. Then another and another. Palmer's jaw tightened slightly, but covered it with another forced smile. Well, he said, shifting in his chair, this has certainly been an interesting conversation. Musk nodded. I'd say so. The studio lights burned hot. The cameras kept rolling. Palmer licked his lips, trying to keep moving. All right, folks, he said, turning back to the audience. Give it up for Elon Musk. A mix of applause and murmurs filled the room. Musk stood up, shook Palmer's hand, and walked off stage, leaving the host sitting there, still trying to process what had just happened. But the real storm was just beginning. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, the tension in the studio didn't fade. It thickened. The usual post-show chatter was muted. The usual flurry of producers, assistants, and camera operators moved with an odd quietness. Palmer ripped off his earpiece and tossed it onto the desk. His face still wore a forced grin, but his eyes darted toward his producer. "What the hell was that?" he muttered under his breath. The producer didn't answer. He was too busy staring at his phone. So was half the studio. It had taken less than 5 minutes. The interview wasn't even officially online yet, but someone in the audience had been recording. Clips were already flooding social media. X, Twitter was on fire. The headline practically wrote itself. Elon Musk turns the tables on Bryant Palmer, calls out media hypocrisy on live TV. Musk had barely stepped backstage when his phone vibrated. He checked it. His mentions were skyrocketing. One clip, then another. Posted by an account with just a few thousand followers, the video quickly racked up hundreds of thousands of views. The comments flooded in fast. Elon just took Palmer apart like an engineer breaking down a bad prototype. This wasn't an interview, it was an execution. Palmer wasn't prepared for any of this. And then came the think pieces, the debates, and the analysis. Some hailed Musk's response as brilliant. Others called it arrogant. Some said Palmer had walked right into his own trap, while others claimed Musk had cleverly avoided real accountability by flipping the script. Either way, one thing was certain. People weren't talking about Palmer's questions anymore. They were talking about Musk's answers. Palmer stormed into his dressing room, slamming the door behind him. His producer followed, speaking carefully. "Listen, we need to be ready for how this is going to play out." Palmer scoffed as he poured himself a drink. "Oh, I know how it's going to play out. The internet's going to eat this up. Musk fanboys will act like he walked on water, and I'll be the biased journalist who got owned." He shook his head. The guy literally dodged every question. The producer hesitated. Did he, though? Palmer's jaw tightened, and the producer sighed. "The thing is, Bryant, people don't like feeling like they've been manipulated. And tonight, you kind of looked like you were manipulating." Palmer's grip on his glass tightened. The producer glanced at his phone again. "We need to get ahead of this." Palmer exhaled sharply. "Yeah? And what do you suggest?" "Damage control." Palmer let out a bitter laugh. "You want me to apologize?" "Not happening." The producer shook his head. "Not an apology, a reframing. We spin it, say Musk was deflecting, that he couldn't handle real scrutiny. We say he proved he's just as thin-skinned as the people he criticizes." Palmer narrowed his eyes, considering it. But before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. An assistant stuck her head in, looking nervous. "Bryant," she said carefully, "the network wants a meeting now." Meanwhile, Musk walked out of the studio and straight into a waiting Tesla. The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Big night." Musk smirked. "Something like that." His phone buzzed again, a message from one of his closest advisors. "That was insane. Your engagement numbers just went through the roof." Musk scrolled through his feed, watching the narrative unfold in real time. Every reaction, every breakdown, every hot take. He could already see what was coming next. Tomorrow, Palmer's team would try to salvage this. They'd call Musk a billionaire playing victim, a master of deflection, a media manipulator. They'd spin it every way they could, but it wouldn't matter. Because tonight, in front of millions of people, the illusion had cracked. Once people see the cracks, they don't stop looking for more. By morning, the interview had become more than just a viral clip. It was a moment. News outlets scrambled to cover it, each offering their own interpretation. Some called Musk's response a masterclass in composure. Others painted Palmer as a journalist caught off guard by his own tactics. The debate wasn't just about what had been said, it was about what it meant. On one side, people saw Musk as a disruptor, someone who refused to play by the media's rules. A billionaire, yes, but one who spoke plainly and wasn't afraid to call out hypocrisy. On the other side, critics argued Musk had dodged real accountability, skillfully redirecting the conversation without addressing the ethical concerns surrounding his companies. But beyond the arguments, beyond the hot takes and think pieces, something deeper was happening. People were questioning things. They were questioning how interviews were conducted, how narratives were shaped, and how media figures like Palmer thrived on spectacle rather than truth. And that's where the real shift began. Because once an audience starts asking why something feels off, why a journalist seems more interested in a gotcha moment than in a real discussion, why certain companies or industries never get the same level of scrutiny. Once that process starts, it doesn't stop. The media? It hates when people start thinking that way. At the network, the meeting was tense. Palmer sat across from the executives, arms crossed. He had been here before after controversial interviews, but this time, it felt different. One of the higher-ups, a woman in a navy suit, set her phone down and spoke first. "The numbers are through the roof," she admitted, glancing at her screen. "Highest engagement we've had all year." Palmer forced a smile.
See?
"You're welcome." Another executive sighed. "Bryant, the problem is, it's not going our way." Palmer scoffed. "Oh, come on. It's just a news cycle. It'll die down in a few days." The woman in navy shook her head. "This is bigger than that. The comments, the reactions, people aren't just talking about Musk. They're talking about us, about the industry, about how we do interviews, about whether we're actually holding powerful people accountable or just playing a role." Palmer rolled his eyes. "They'll forget. They always do." A long pause. One of the executives exchanged a glance with another. Finally, one of them spoke up. "Maybe this time they won't." Across the country, Musk was sitting in a quiet office, sipping coffee as he read through the headlines. His team had already compiled the data: engagement spikes, media reactions, sentiment tracking. He barely paid attention to it. Instead, he scrolled through a simple post someone had made on X the night before. It wasn't from a journalist. It wasn't from a political pundit. It was just a regular person, someone who had watched the interview and summed it up in a single sentence. The scariest thing about last night wasn't what Musk said. It was realizing how badly the media wants to control the story. Musk smiled slightly and set his phone down. He knew this moment wouldn't last forever, but it didn't have to. Because all it took was one crack in the facade. One moment where people saw the strings being pulled. And once you see the strings, you never look at the puppet show the same way again. The real lesson in all of this wasn't about Elon Musk or Bryant Palmer. It wasn't about who won or lost the interview. It was about perception. People like Palmer had built careers on controlling narratives. They shaped public opinion, decided what was newsworthy, and framed discussions in ways that benefited their industry. But for the first time in a long time, the audience saw through it. And that's the part that truly mattered. Because in a world where information is everywhere, the real power doesn't belong to those who speak the loudest. It belongs to those who learn to listen. So, what do you think? Was this just another viral moment? Or was it something bigger? Drop a comment below, hit the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe for more. Because the conversations that actually matter, they're just getting started.